Good afternoon. Welcome to the tea table. I am so happy you have joined me. This cold, blustery November winds are blowing and the frost is on the ground. It's cozy inside. This is tea time and this is definitely candle time. And I brought a candle to the tea table. It's a beautiful candle. It's a single, and it has such beautiful design on it. Looks very Baroque. Well, almost Renaissance Baroque. It has everything. But I'm going to let it stand right here so we can have that beautiful warm candlelight. I've always thought a cozy fire, candlelight, and tea is the perfect trio for any cold, stormy day. Well, we are listening today to some very special music from George Frederick Handel. And we haven't talked much about him. He comes a little bit before Johann Sebastian Bach, and they are friends and they know of each other. And he actually has an influence. We all have an influence on each other. The greatest people, they have people that have influenced them, definitely. Well, before we start with Handel, if you haven't gotten your tea yet, please pause and get your tea, and I'll be waiting for you. I have brought a brown china set for November, and it has a lot of symbolism. We lost someone. Let's see who we lost. I brought along these darling little salt and pepper shakers from Mount Vernon. It's George Washington and Martha Washington. They're very old, and they were in my china closet next to my brown set. I thought, let's talk a little bit about George Washington today also. And then for my teacup, I'm using this lovely brown that I call home. It's just beautiful pictures of home. The British made a lot of English china with American scenes. And for my treat, these are special. These are homemade bran muffins. My daughter-in-law, Alexandra, brought them by yesterday, and they are just perfect. They are perfection. They have raisins and molasses and buttermilk. They are the real thing. And I treasure these, and I have them on a dish. Let me show you. We're going to kind of cover a little bit of all of America. This is the Southern Plantation. And it was called Heritage Hall. And it's done by English China people. Isn't that beautiful? So I put the muffins on that. And then my teapot is so special. I love this. And this is what it says. It says on there, let's see, the light is shining kind of bright. It says Safe Harbor. And it's scenes, I think it's scenes of the Boston Harbor, which we talked about last time in the Boston Tea Party. And my little creamer, it is British castles. I have a little bit of everything. I love a variety. You can mix them together. This is another brown English castle. So the colonial people, most of them came from England. They came from this very civilized, beautiful country with buildings and everything so lovely to the rough wilderness of America. It's a big shock. So I am going to, if you have your tea now, let's pour out together. We are having a little tea party. Oh, see the nice steam? When it's cold, you see the steam. Oh, that pot is a little heavy too. It's very full. And here's just a splash of milk is what I like. I'm having very strong, brisk British tea. Delicious. Well, I'm going to put the pot, put my cup down. Got a lot going on here. You know, no matter how big the tea tray is, it never seems quite big enough for, I'm putting maybe too much on. Let's bring the candle back now. And I have a picture of George Frederick Handel for you. And this was from last Sunday. My friend Robin Dassel Peterson, who is a violin teacher. She's taught for many, many years. She taught several of my children. She had a recital. She always has a recital the first Sunday afternoon in November. It is such a perfect time to begin the holiday season. Now, George Friedrich Handel was born in Halle, Germany, and he was born in 1685 in Halle, Germany. And then he lived a long life for that, especially for that era. He died in London, and he died in 1759. So he is alive right before when the colonial period of America and the beginnings of America wanting to become a nation. Well, I left you last tea talk, and I must apologize. My phone just went blink and off it went, and I had things I had to do. I could not redo the tea talk, so I just thought I've got to upload it. And my last line was, music can save your life. And you know, it's true. There are so many stories in history, and maybe you can think of more, where someone's life, and this kind of happened to George Friedrich Handel. He was a great composer, but he had left Germany and gone to England. And he was trying to get launched with his music. And things happened, and he was a bit neglected and overlooked, and he felt literally forsaken. He went into actually a deep depression. He went into actual despair. And he lived up above, a landlady below, and she said she was so worried about him because when she would bring his meals, he wasn't eating. And she could tell he was so discouraged. He had actually hit rock bottom. And then a knock came to his door. And the knock, he went, and it was a man with all of this written lyric, which is called a liberata, and it was brought to him, words. Can you put this to music? And George Friedrich Handel looked, and he had been so down and felt so hopeless. Suddenly he had a spark of light, and he said, I will take it. I will try to do my best. And up the stairs he went, closed his door, and it's a true story. I believe it was within the period of 3 weeks, he composed the entire Handel's Messiah. He gave God the glory. He said, then his landlady came up trying to give him food, and he wouldn't take anything, and he was locked in his room. Then she was really worried about him. She didn't know what to do. But he was in there composing. And there's a line that says, Handel said, I felt the heavens were open, and I saw the great God, And I believe that's when he wrote the Hallelujah Chorus. And many of you are even more familiar with Handel's music than Johann Sebastian Bach, because everyone knows the Messiah and the Hallelujah Chorus in America. Now, most people obviously know Bach also, but people that are not acquainted with classical music at all can generally identify the Messiah. Well, Handel then overnight became a sensation. He went from zero to hero. Music saved his life. And there are other examples in history. But before we leave Handel, I'm playing the Handel's Water music. It's beautiful music. And it was the King of England, King George. Yes, it was the crazy king that was king when we were becoming America. Asked him, because in his younger days, George was all right, but he really went off the deep end. And that's one of the reasons the American Revolution happened. He would have these bouts of not being himself, and the American colonists weren't going to put up with it. He was making demands that were unreasonable. But backing up, he commissioned George Frederick Handel to write music for commemorating a battle that was won between a peace treaty between Paris and England, and it was called the Royal Fireworks. And that's what I'm playing. And King George got on a barge with all his royal entourage and went down the Thames River and had Handel and all of his musicians in the other barge playing their instruments, riding along on the water. Thank God it didn't rain or didn't storm. But that's where this beautiful music originates. And my husband had, before we were married, he had found an album of the Royal Fire. In those days, it was listening to records. And he had found a beautiful album, an English album of Handel's water music. And he had it, and he loved it. But then I had been in Europe, and I came back, and then we were engaged, and he played it for me. And I said, oh my, I love that Royal Fireworks. That's the perfect music to walk down the aisle for a wedding. So that is the piece that I walked down the aisle for my wedding. And it was a pipe organ played by Peter Hollick, St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle, up on Capitol Hill. I had a trumpet. His last name was Nicodemus, very good trumpeter. And my husband and I were married by Father Dennis Bennett. Many of you have heard of him. Very special Episcopal Anglican priest who was a leader of a spiritual renewal movement, actually in not just Seattle, in the world. And so that is the music that I am playing today. We haven't come to my song yet, but when we do, I'll tell you. And George Friedrich Handel is just one of the beautiful, beautiful, truly Baroque composers. And as we have talked before on the Tea Talk, so often in history, you have clumps of great people together. They inspire each other. This is true with Handel and Johann Sebastian Bach and Haydn. And then later, of course, Bach inspires Beethoven and Mozart. But there's this great output. And it's that way in literature. You have the Romantic poets, Byron, Keats, and Shelley. They play off each other. Then you had in the 20th century C.S. Lewis, and I've read his story, his biography, and he said, without our meetings, they would meet at the pub once a week in Oxford. He and his brother and Tolkien and a couple of others, and they would read their writings to each other and inspire, because artists are so sensitive. writers, composers, painters, there's a tendency, they're very, very sensitive, and they can be very hard on themselves, and any form of rejection is very hard, and they need encouragement. We all need encouragement. We all need build up in order to accomplish the things that God wants us to accomplish. And so don't be afraid. If you see your friend doing something great, tell them, encourage them, give them verbal. Words are powerful. Well, I also found 2 plates I wanted to show you, and this is called Safe Harbor, and it's the historical America, Massachusetts. I think it's the Boston Harbor, where the, Boston Tea Party happened. And right next to it, I have this beautiful plate that I really treasure. And this is the very famous painting of George Washington praying. He was in a battle that was impossible, and he went away from the troops into the woods, and he prayed. And that is a picture of that. And this is such a famous thing that we're Washington State, so we have a lot of Washington. There's a bust of Washington, beautiful bust, in our rotunda, and our seal has Washington's face on it. And I went to the museum years ago, and they said that the seal was designed. A man took a quarter and circled it and used that face on our Washington State seal. But the special statue is down in front of across from Sylvester Park, in front of the Department now of Education. Because we're a capital city, we have a lot of departments. It is the old Capitol, and it has turrets. It's a beautiful building. And in front is the statue of George Washington on his knees praying. And it was a gift to our state. The matching one is in Washington, D.C., in a park. So these are great people. And what I was thinking, how Washington and Handel relate, is they were basically alive at the same time. Well, Washington is a little younger, but he would have known the music of George Frederick Handel. And in these days, coming off from the Renaissance to the Reformation, people reading and writing, people studying music, you had, again, what you call the Renaissance man. People they wanted to do more than one thing. The Middle Ages, people had been stuck doing like one job. Sometimes people are that way in our world. But someone like Thomas Jefferson, he was a musician. He played the violin. He would solve his riddles when he was writing the Declaration of Independence by playing his violin. It would unlock him. And when his brain would get stuck. And Einstein did the same. But Thomas Jefferson was an architect. He designed beautiful Monticello, where his home now stands still. It's a museum. He was a statesman. He was a writer. He was an inventor. He invented a coffee pot. Isn't that fascinating? And I think we need to be brave and bold and do more than one thing. I believe the perfect education, I wrote this years ago for my children. I said a perfect education is a triangle. One side is the arts, music, painting, musical instruments, singing. The other side is history, literature, and writing poetry. And then the bottom would be mathematics and sciences. And then in the middle, I put God in the Bible, because one has to have an understanding of who they are, where they came from, that God created them in His image for His glory. And that is what the Reformation, Renaissance man is. Life, the glory of God, is man fully alive. Well, I want to finish off this little tea talk by talking about one more really interesting historical. I saw it with my own eyes. Richard the Lionheart. Now you all know him. He's a real person in history from Robin Hood. Remember bad King John, his brother, that was trying to get the throne? But Richard was off riding his horse. They called him Lionheart because he was so brave. He went on a crusade to take Jerusalem from the Turk. Well, when he got there, he met a man on the battlefield who was almost they were equals, Saladin, and he was a Muslim Arab. But they both were so strong and so brave, they literally respected each other. And they stopped the battle and they had a time of fellowship and discussion. Now, isn't that interesting? They actually met, and then they went on, and Richard did take Jerusalem. They had it for a while. I don't know how long exactly it was kept, but it was always being fought over. Well, then he came back up through Europe. He was on his way back to England, came up through Austria. And do you know the King of Austria did not like Richard, and he captured him after all that and put him in a prison. And I was on the Danube River on a river cruise coming, we were going to Milk from, it's near Vienna. It's all along the Danube River cruise. And to the right, the tour guide said, now that is, it's a little broken down ruins now. That was the castle Richard the Lionheart was kept in. Then beside the Danube are two statues, one of Richard, and they're kind of crumbly. They're really old. And one is Blondel, his musician, his troubadour. Well, as the story goes, Blondel, loyal and true to King Richard, came over to Germany and Austria and was sneaking around and playing his harp like he was just a troubadour, found out where Richard was, went up to the castle and sang outside the window. And he sang what the plan was to get Richard out, that they were going to come and take him out. And they got Richard that night. Wasn't that beautiful? A song saved Richard, and back to England he was taken. King Richard was a wonderful king, Richard the Lionheart, and he was always fighting in so many battles, defending different parts of England and the continent he would be on, and he didn't spend a lot of time on his throne. Remember, his mother was Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was the daughter of a king. She was the wife of 2 kings, the mother of 3 kings. The most fascinating woman, I think, in the late Middle Ages to study. If you study Eleanor of Aquitaine, you learn about all of the history because she's involved in everything. She has a long life, and it's quite a fascinating story. There have been several movies made. There is one called The Lion in Winter, if you want to get a picture. But before you watch anything, do your own research. Just Google her name and it's all there, the pictures. Just fascinating, truly rich history. And that's why we all know Richard, because of Robin Hood and his merry band of men. Well, I hope that you've been having a good week. I have been having a fabulous week. I am loving the cozy weather. We had rain pouring so hard the other night. We have big trees and pine cones were just hitting our roof. Like I felt like we were in a war zone, but then I fell off to sleep and I slept like a rock. Somehow the cold weather makes me sleep so sound. Tea really is the best this time of year. was thinking of George Washington, and because last week we had Veterans Day, and next week we're going to talk about Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims. So I guess I'm going backwards. Veterans Day is this 20th century, really was established. Then I'm backing up with American Revolution and that period. And then next time we will come back up further to the 1619, 1620, 1621. And we're going to go back to 15 when the Huguenots came to Florida, St. Augustine, Florida. And I didn't realize that. And a lovely lady, a friend of mine that took me to lunch last week, gave me a book on it. She said, I think you should have this book on the Huguenots. Wonderful French. They suffered so much. They were the French Protestants under John Calvin, and they had been actually sent by the Queen to try to have a settlement in the New World. But the Spanish came and did not want them there. And I'll tell you the story next week. We'll combine it with our Pilgrim story. But that's a fascinating study. The people that paid the price to settle America. Land of the free, home of the brave. We're very, very rich. We're very blessed. And I hope that you will now be preparing. I hope you all have somewhere special to go for Thanksgiving and be with family, friends. And if you're out of town or you're out of country, find someone to have Thanksgiving with. I have spent several Thanksgivings out of my country, out of my state, and I will tell them about you I will tell you about them next time. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and push the notification and you'll be notified. And then also please share with others, anyone. There's a tribe out there. We are a tribe. We have kindred hearts. There's a tribe of people that love tea, that love history, that love music, and love positive good news. Please share with them and tell them to pass it on. And if you liked it, and if you have a comment or a question, please, or maybe you have a story in history of someone's life who was saved through music. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will look forward to seeing you next time.